Here you can see where they arrived from. They had gathered in the southern part of England in what were called sausages, which were areas excluded to the members of the general public and within which the men and the material built up over a period of 2 years from 1942, 43 and intensively in the early part of 1944. Also here at Arromanches, looking east, we look out over the British and Canadian landing sectors, Gold, Juno and Sword beaches. And it was on those beaches with 600 yards of sand in front of them that 90,000 men had to run ashore against opposing fire. Now on that morning of June the 6th, every inch of that beach was covered by a soldier's boot print. And I know that because my dad was one of them. Looking west, you see the topography changes. It becomes cliffs and coves. And that is typical of the American landing sector. The most famous cove in there is Omaha Beach. And we're going to go next up to the Long Gun Battery, which is about 3 miles along the coast from that point that you see there. We're going to have a look at a couple of these casemates in detail. We're going to look first of all at the circle here. Going in towards it, we can see how it looks. There you have the 152mm cannon made by Skoda. And here, very importantly, you can see the Germans' view of the beach as the soldiers would have appeared to them as they were coming ashore. What the Germans could see were the dark shapes of the attacking soldiers silhouetted against the bright orange sandy background. They were moving targets, and with all those forms of weaponry, not only the machine guns, but the mortars, the flamethrowers, and the cannons, you can imagine the carnage that went on in those first few hours. Those bocage lanes were a death trap for the Allied forces. They found it very difficult to make any headway against them. Now, if you can imagine, if you're in a tank or a jeep and you're advancing along the road and somewhere in the undergrowth in front of you is the very small round of a German 88mm cannon looking at you. And if he fires at you, that's the end of it. Moving on now to the British military cemetery at Bayeux. This is the largest of the 22 British cemeteries in Normandy, with 4,500 burials, including 466 German soldiers. German soldiers' bodies were being brought in at the same time that British soldiers' bodies were being brought in, and they had to be buried somewhere, so they were buried in the same area as the British soldiers, but in an area reserved for them entirely. Here we have a view of the German military cemetery at Le Camp. There are in excess of 22,000 burials. And these 22,000 burials are more or less complete bodies which have been buried under the headstones you see here lying flush with the ground. Typically, there are 2 burials to each headstone, to each grave plot, but it can be as many as 6 in a single grave plot. Michael Wittmann was the greatest tank ace of World War II. There is a picture of him, and he demolished 138 enemy tanks together with 132 anti-tank guns, a record which has never been equalled in warfare.